The conference room glass felt cold against my palm when Mark Sullivan said the words that changed everything. "You took a sick day without approval," he said, his voice so calm it was almost bored. "That shows a complete lack of commitment to this team and the company's values." I stared at him across the polished conference table, my head still fuzzy from the fever I'd barely shaken off the day before. My body ached. My throat felt raw. I dragged myself back to work that morning specifically because I didn't want to miss another day, even though I probably should have stayed home longer to fully recover. Two managers sat beside Mark like sentries. Their eyes stayed fixed downward, studying the wood grain of the table like it contained the secrets of the universe. Neither of them looked at me. Not even once. Not even a quick glance of sympathy or acknowledgement that this situation was absurd. I had a doctor's note, I managed to say, my voice coming out smaller and weaker than I wanted. I submitted it through the portal exactly like I'm supposed to. I followed every procedure in the handbook. Mark slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward me. The sound of paper on wood was quiet, but in that silent room it felt as loud as a gunshot. "We're terminating your employment," he said flatly, like he was reading from a script he'd memorized. "Effective immediately. Please surrender your security badge and company property before you leave the building." My ears started ringing. The words didn't make sense at first, like my brain was refusing to process what I was hearing. Fired. For taking one sick day with proper documentation. Publicly. Cleanly. Efficiently. Like I was nothing. Like 8 years meant absolutely nothing. I looked at the other managers again, desperately hoping one of them would speak up, would say this was a mistake or an overreaction. They didn't move. They just sat there like statues while my entire career crumbled in front of me. I didn't cry, even though my throat felt tight and my eyes started burning with tears I refused to let fall. I just nodded slowly, stood up from my chair on shaking legs, and reached into my pocket for my security badge. My hands trembled just enough for me to notice, but I hoped desperately that no one else could see how badly this was affecting me. I wanted to leave with whatever dignity I had left. Mark didn't even bother to meet my eyes anymore. He was already checking his phone like this meeting was over, and I'd already ceased to exist in his world. The two other managers remained motionless, still staring at the table like cowards. The walk from the conference room through the open office felt like walking through thick water. Every step took concentrated effort. I could feel every single pair of eyes on me, tracking my movement across the floor. Some coworkers looked away quickly when I glanced in their direction, suddenly very interested in their computer screens. Others stared openly, their expressions a complicated mix of pity, curiosity, shock, and probably relief that this horrible thing was happening to me instead of them. Someone whispered something to the person next to them. I couldn't hear the words, but I could imagine what they were saying. What did she do? Why is she leaving? Did you hear she got fired? The elevator couldn't arrive fast enough. I pressed the button 3 times even though I knew it wouldn't help. When the doors finally slid open and I stepped inside alone, when they closed and I was finally by myself, that's when my chest started burning. That's when the full reality of what had just happened crashed into me like a wave. 8 years of my life. Gone in 15 minutes. My name is Frankie Tate, though my full legal name is Francesca Marie Tate. Until that cold Tuesday morning in March, I was a senior operations analyst at Patterson and Associates, a mid-sized financial consulting firm located in downtown Chicago. For 8 years straight, I'd shown up early, stayed late when projects needed it, and maintained a completely perfect record. Not a single written warning. Not one complaint from a client or a coworker. My annual performance reviews were always marked exceeds expectations or outstanding, with bonuses that reflected my value to the team. I was the person people came to when they had complicated questions about financial reconciliations. I was trusted with sensitive client data. I was reliable, competent, and completely invisible in the best possible way for someone in my position. I didn't make waves. I didn't cause drama. I just did excellent work and went home. But I wasn't actually fired for taking a sick day, no matter what Mark Sullivan's official termination paperwork might claim. I was fired because I knew too much about something Mark desperately wanted to keep buried forever. I just didn't fully understand that yet, not in that moment when I was standing in the elevator with my throat tight and my hands shaking and my future suddenly completely uncertain. But I would understand soon enough. And when I did, when all the pieces finally connected in my mind, everything would change. Not just for me, but for Mark Sullivan and everyone who'd sat silently while he destroyed my career to protect his secrets. 3 months before that termination meeting, on a quiet Thursday afternoon in December, Mark Sullivan had appeared at my cubicle unexpectedly. It was late in the day, almost 6 o'clock. Most people had already packed up and headed home for the evening. The office was nearly empty except for a few workaholics finishing projects and the distant sound of the cleaning crew starting their nightly rounds on the floor below us. Mark leaned casually against my cubicle partition wall and lowered his voice even though there was barely anyone left to overhear us. "Frankie, can you do me a quick favor and reclassify this entry?" he asked, pointing at a spreadsheet displayed on my computer screen. It was a ledger entry for a vendor payment that I'd been reviewing as part of my normal monthly reconciliation work. I squinted at the numbers on my screen, feeling that familiar tickle of concern when something doesn't quite add up right. "Reclassify it how exactly?" I asked carefully. "Just move it under general operating expenses temporarily," he said with an easy, confident smile that probably worked well in client meetings. "We'll clean it up and put it back where it belongs next quarter, when we have more time to deal with it properly." But it wasn't a temporary accounting adjustment like he was suggesting. What he was really asking me to do was take a tax liability and quietly bury it under vendor expenses where it wouldn't be noticed during the quarterly reviews that external auditors performed. The amount was significant enough that it would definitely affect the company's reported tax obligations. I flagged it in my personal notes system and told him I'd need to get proper approval from the finance department before making any changes to expense classifications. His smile didn't change at all, but something shifted in his eyes. Something cold. "Everyone does this kind of thing, Frankie," he said quietly. "It's just how business works in the real world." That was the exact moment when everything between us changed. That was when he started watching me differently. I went straight home after being fired and sat on my couch in my work clothes for hours, watching the sun slowly disappear behind the tall buildings outside my apartment window. No email arrived from Human Resources explaining what would happen. No exit packet showed up with information about final paychecks, accumulated vacation time, or how to continue my health insurance benefits. No instructions came about returning company property or scheduling some kind of formal exit interview. Just complete and total silence, like I never existed at all in their world. I checked my phone obsessively, refreshing my email every few minutes, absolutely convinced that something official would eventually arrive. Some acknowledgement that I'd worked there for 8 years. Some basic professional courtesy about next steps. Nothing came. The silence felt heavy and deliberate and intentional, like they wanted me to just disappear quietly without asking uncomfortable questions or making any kind of trouble. By the time morning light started creeping through my windows again, I tried logging into my company email account to download some personal files and contacts I'd saved there over the years. The system immediately locked me out with a bright red error message. Access denied. Account terminated. My 8 years' worth of work emails, professional contacts, and important project files were completely gone, erased like they'd never existed in the first place. That's when the reality of what was happening started sinking in at a deeper level. This wasn't just about firing me for performance issues or downsizing or restructuring. This was about erasing me completely and quickly, making sure I had no resources and no connections and no evidence of anything that had happened. When Friday arrived and payroll deposits hit bank accounts across the company, I checked my account with my heart racing. No bonus, even though we were in the middle of bonus season, and I'd exceeded all my targets. No severance package, despite 8 years of service. My health insurance was terminated immediately, leaving me without coverage starting that same day. Mark had timed everything perfectly to cause maximum damage. I sat at my kitchen table staring at my bank account balance and laughed once. It was a short, sharp sound that surprised me when it came out. But suddenly, everything made complete sense. The timing wasn't accidental. The lack of communication wasn't an oversight. This was deliberate. He wanted me gone fast, gone quiet, and gone without any resources to fight back. What Mark didn't know was that I'd been quietly documenting things for months. Not because I planned to use it against him, but because something about the numbers had felt wrong, and I'd learned long ago to trust my instincts about financial irregularities. I told myself to just move on and forget about Patterson and Associates. People get fired unfairly every single day. That's just how the world works sometimes. Fighting it would probably just make things worse and burn bridges I might need later. The smart thing would be to update my resume, start networking, and find something better. But then I opened my personal laptop and saw a folder I'd created months earlier. It was labeled Reconciliations Q4, and it sat there in my documents folder like it had been waiting for this exact moment. I hadn't kept those files out of spite or because I was planning some revenge. I'd saved them because the numbers Mark kept asking me to had just never quite added up right. Something felt wrong in my gut, and I'd learned to document things when my instincts sent up warning flags. Now, staring at that folder, my stomach tightened. I clicked it open and started reading through the files I'd almost forgotten I had. The folder contained everything. Emails with clear instructions from Mark. Ledger exports showing the original entries and the adjusted ones. Complete approval chains that showed who signed off on what and when. Mark Sullivan's name appeared everywhere, like a signature on a crime scene. "Let's keep this off the books for now," one email said. "Don't loop finance into this yet," said another. "We'll handle it directly. We'll clean it up next quarter when things settle down." He'd written at least a dozen times. Except next quarter never came. The adjustments never got corrected. The buried expenses just stayed buried, hidden under layers of legitimate vendor payments and general operating costs. Quarter after quarter, the discrepancies grew larger, while Mark kept promising they'd fix it all soon. I started cross-referencing dates and amounts, my analytical brain automatically building timelines and calculating totals. The pattern was obvious, once you knew to look for it. This wasn't sloppy accounting or honest mistakes. This was deliberate fraud. 2 days after I was fired, my phone buzzed with a text message from a former coworker named Amanda. "I heard what happened," her message said. "I'm really sorry. But Frankie, be careful. Mark's been asking around about who still talks to you." My hands went cold reading those words. He wasn't just relieved I was gone. He wasn't just moving on with business as usual. He was actively monitoring who might still be in contact with me, which meant he was worried about something specific. He was scared. That realization changed everything for me. If Mark was scared enough to track my connections, then what I knew was even more dangerous than I'd thought. He hadn't fired me because I took a sick day. He'd fired me because I was a liability, someone who knew too much about financial irregularities he couldn't afford to have exposed. I read Amanda's message 3 more times, then deleted it from my phone. But I couldn't delete the knowledge that I was now apparently a threat worth monitoring. I filed for unemployment benefits the following Monday morning, sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop and carefully filling out all the required forms as honestly and thoroughly as I could. The claim was denied within 48 hours. 2 days. That's all it took for them to reject me. I sat there staring at the rejection letter displayed on my screen, reading the reason given over and over until the words started to blur together. Termination due to employee misconduct. That's exactly what Patterson and Associates had officially reported to the state unemployment office. Not position eliminated, or reduction in workforce, or even performance issues that led to dismissal. Misconduct. They were officially labeling me as someone who had done something wrong, something bad enough and serious enough to justify immediate termination without any benefits or severance pay. It was a complete lie, a total fabrication designed specifically to make sure I received nothing and had absolutely no recourse to fight back. I read that denial letter 3 separate times, my anger building steadily with each word I processed. The first time, I felt shocked and confused. The second time, I felt hurt and betrayed. The third time, I felt something much more dangerous settling into my chest. Cold, focused determination. That was the exact moment when this entire situation stopped being about a job or a career or my professional reputation in the industry. That was the moment when it became about something much bigger and more important. They had tried to erase me from their company. They had tried to discredit me publicly with lies. They had tried to leave me with absolutely nothing. Now I was going to make absolutely certain that the truth came out, no matter what it cost me personally. A week later, a white envelope arrived at my apartment. No return address, but I recognized the corporate legal letterhead immediately when I opened it. The letter was short and carefully worded by lawyers who knew exactly how to make threats sound like friendly reminders. It mentioned my confidentiality agreement, which I'd signed 8 years ago on my first day. It suggested I refrain from making unfounded claims about the company or its employees. It reminded me of potential legal consequences if I violated the terms of my employment agreement. What the letter didn't include was any kind of apology. No acknowledgement that maybe, possibly, I'd been treated unfairly. No correction of the misconduct claim they'd filed with unemployment. No offer to discuss what had happened or find some reasonable resolution. Just pressure. Just intimidation. Just a reminder that they had lawyers and resources, and I had nothing but anger and a folder of files on my laptop. I sat at my kitchen table holding that letter for a long time, reading between the carefully constructed lines. They were scared. Really scared. I didn't respond to the legal letter, which is probably what they expected and hoped I would do. Instead, I organized everything I had into clear, logical categories. I created detailed timelines showing when each questionable transaction occurred. I cross-checked the internal ledgers against the company's public quarterly filings. I calculated the total discrepancies across multiple quarters and verified that my numbers were accurate. I built spreadsheets. I highlighted inconsistencies. I noted every time Mark had asked me to reclassify something temporarily. I tracked which entries had been promised to be fixed next quarter, but never were. This wasn't about revenge or getting even or making Mark suffer. This was about documentation. This was about building an airtight case based purely on facts and numbers that couldn't be disputed or explained away. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. I was going to be methodical, careful, and absolutely certain before I took any action that couldn't be undone. At 2:14 in the morning on a Wednesday, I almost deleted everything. My cursor hovered over the folder, my finger trembling over the trackpad. What if I was wrong about what all this meant? What if there was some legitimate explanation I was missing? What if I destroyed my entire future career by becoming known as a disgruntled employee who made false accusations against a former employer? The fear felt overwhelming in that dark apartment with just the glow of my laptop screen and the sound of my own breathing. I could just let it go. Move on. Find a new job and forget any of this ever happened. Then I remembered Mark's face in that conference room, bored and dismissive. I remembered his voice, saying I showed a lack of commitment. I remembered him checking his phone while I handed over my badge like I was already invisible. I remembered the word misconduct on my unemployment denial. And I kept going. I made myself a promise about what I would and wouldn't do. I wouldn't leak anything to the media or post anonymous accusations online. I wouldn't send threatening emails or try to contact Mark directly. I wouldn't do anything that could be considered harassment or intimidation or corporate sabotage. I would follow the rules. All of them. Exactly as they were written. I would use the proper channels, file the appropriate reports, and submit everything through official procedures with my real name attached. If this was going to mean anything, it had to be done right. It had to be legal, documented, and completely by the book. That's what would make it unstoppable. Not because I was being sneaky or underhanded, but because I was being so perfectly, completely legitimate that there would be no way to dismiss what I was revealing. The truth doesn't need tricks to be powerful. It just needs to be presented clearly, backed by evidence, and submitted through the right channels to people who have the authority to act on it. I spent 3 full weeks carefully preparing everything before I submitted anything official to anyone. When I finally filed the whistleblower disclosure through the proper federal channel, I made absolutely sure every single detail was perfect. I included every attachment I'd collected and organized. I highlighted every single relevant date in yellow. I reconciled every questionable amount with complete supporting documentation from multiple sources. The submission form asked if I was willing to be contacted for follow-up questions and additional information. I checked the yes box without hesitation. My hands had been shaking for weeks every single time I even thought about taking this step. Every time I opened that folder on my laptop, my heart would race and my stomach would tighten with anxiety about what I was considering doing. But when I finally moved my cursor over the submit button and clicked it, when I actually sent everything off into the official system, my hands were completely steady. I felt suddenly calm in a way I hadn't felt since the exact day I was fired. This was right. This was necessary. This was the only thing I could do and still be able to live with myself and look at my reflection in the mirror. And whatever happened next, whatever consequences came from this decision, I knew deep in my soul that I'd done the only thing I could possibly live with. The confirmation screen appeared almost immediately, giving me a reference number and telling me that someone would be in contact if they needed any additional information or clarification. I carefully wrote down the reference number in my notebook, closed my laptop slowly, and just sat in the quiet stillness of my apartment for a long while. There was absolutely no going back now. The truth was out there, submitted officially, and whatever happened next was completely out of my control. Weeks passed after I submitted the whistleblower report. Nobody called. No emails arrived asking for clarification or additional details. I started wondering if my submission had just disappeared into some bureaucratic void where these things go to die, filed away, and forgotten by people with more important cases to handle. I started a new job search, quietly sending out my resume and going to interviews. I didn't mention Patterson and Associates unless I had to, and when I did, I kept my explanations brief and professional. Then one morning in early May, my phone rang. The caller ID showed unknown number. I almost didn't answer. I was tired of spam calls and scam warnings. But something made me pick up. "Is this Francesca Tate?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes," I said carefully. "Miss Tate, this is Diana Kowalski from the Office of Tax Administration. I'm calling regarding your whistleblower submission from April 9th. Do you have time to speak with me?" My heart started racing. Yes, I have time. They didn't say Mark Sullivan's name during the phone call, but they didn't have to. Diana Kowalski asked me to walk her through specific entries I'd flagged in my submission. She asked about dates, amounts, and approval chains. She asked if I had direct knowledge of instructions to reclassify expenses. She asked if I'd raise concerns internally before the adjustments were made. I answered every question calmly and factually, pulling up my files and reading directly from the documentation I'd prepared. I didn't embellish anything or add emotional commentary. I just stated what I knew and what I could prove. The call lasted 47 minutes. At the end, Diana paused for a moment, and I could hear papers rustling on her end. Then she said something that made my chest feel tight. "Thank you, Miss Tate. This has been extremely helpful. We'll be in touch if we need any additional information." Helpful. That single word meant they were taking this seriously. That what I'd found wasn't just my imagination or a disgruntled employee making trouble. It was real, and they were going to look into it. 2 weeks after that phone call, I got a message from Amanda again. "Something's happening at the office," she texted. "Finance department is completely freaking out. There are external auditors here asking questions and requesting old files. Nobody knows what's going on, but everyone's nervous." I closed my laptop without responding and went for a long walk through my neighborhood. The spring air felt lighter somehow, easier to breathe. The anxiety that had been sitting in my chest for weeks started to ease just slightly. The investigation was real. It was happening. People were asking questions and looking at files and connecting the same dots I'd connected months ago. I didn't feel triumphant or excited or victorious. I just felt tired and relieved that maybe, possibly, the truth was going to come out after all. When I got home from my walk, I made myself dinner and tried not to think about what was probably happening at Patterson and Associates right now. News started trickling out slowly over the next few weeks, mostly through Amanda's occasional updates. Vendor contracts were being frozen while they verified payment histories. Regular payments to outside firms were suddenly delayed pending approval from the board. Emergency meetings were being held with doors closed and voices lowered. And Mark Sullivan had stopped coming into the office. At first, people thought he was just working from home or traveling for client meetings. But days turned into a week, then 2 weeks, and his office stayed dark. His assistant stopped scheduling meetings for him. His name disappeared from the internal calendar. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone could feel something was seriously wrong. I wondered what Mark was thinking during those weeks. Was he scared? Angry? Did he regret firing me over a sick day? Or did he still think he'd done nothing wrong? Did he understand yet that the choice to get rid of me had actually sealed his fate? I'd probably never know the answers to those questions. And honestly, I wasn't sure I cared anymore. On a Friday afternoon in June, I was scrolling through news on my phone when I noticed something small and easy to miss. Patterson and Associates had filed a routine public disclosure update, the kind of thing companies do quarterly that most people never read. But buried in the dense financial language was something that made my pulse quicken. Revised tax disclosures. Restated earnings for the previous fiscal year. Corrections to vendor expense classifications. Those kinds of changes don't happen by accident. They don't happen because someone made an honest mistake in data entry. They happen when someone very important messed up badly enough that the company has to officially acknowledge it, correct the public record, and hope nobody notices the implications. I saved a screenshot of that filing to my phone. This was confirmation. Not just internal whispers or secondhand rumors from worried coworkers. This was official acknowledgement that something was wrong with Patterson and Associates' financial reporting. And I knew exactly whose decisions had caused those errors that now required public correction. The announcement came on a Monday morning, buried in a short company-wide email that tried to sound routine and professional. Mark Sullivan has resigned from his position as Director of Operations, effective immediately. We thank him for his years of service and wish him well in his future endeavors. No farewell party. No final email from Mark thanking everyone for working with him. No announcement about where he was going next or what opportunities he was pursuing. Just gone. Erased. Exactly like he'd tried to erase me. The man who had fired me for being unreliable and showing a lack of commitment had cost the company millions in restated taxes, penalties, and legal fees. The man who'd called my sick day misconduct had been committing actual fraud for quarters. I read that resignation announcement 3 times, then closed my email and went back to the project I was working on at my new job. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated or satisfied or triumphant. I just felt like the truth had finally caught up with someone who thought he could outrun it forever. About a month after Mark's resignation, I received an unexpected email from Patterson and Associates' HR department. The tone was careful, formal, and extremely cautious, like I was radioactive material they had to handle with special protective equipment. They wanted to schedule a call to discuss my previous employment and clarify some details regarding my departure. I read that email twice, then wrote a polite response declining the conversation. I thanked them for reaching out, but explained that I had moved on to a new position and wasn't interested in revisiting the past. What I didn't say was that nothing they could tell me would change what had happened. No explanation would make the termination fair. No apology would erase the misconduct designation or the denied unemployment or the legal threat letter. They'd made their choices. I'd made mine. And now we all had to live with the consequences. I was already somewhere else, literally and mentally. And I had no intention of looking backward. My new position was at a smaller firm called Westfield Analytics, a place that specialized in financial transparency and compliance consulting. During my final interview, the managing partner had asked me one direct question that made everything feel different from Patterson and Associates. "How do you handle pressure when integrity is involved?" she asked, looking at me carefully across her desk. I thought about that question for a moment before answering honestly. "I document everything," I said. "I follow the rules exactly. And I don't ignore problems just because fixing them might be uncomfortable or inconvenient." She smiled and offered me the position that same day. Working at Westfield felt completely different from my old job. People asked questions when something seemed wrong. Managers wanted honest assessments, not convenient answers. Nobody asked me to reclassify anything temporarily or keep financial issues off the books until next quarter. It felt like breathing clean air after years of not quite realizing I'd been suffocating. I never heard from Mark Sullivan again after his resignation. No apology email arrived explaining his side of things. No attempt to justify what he'd done or blame someone else for the problems. No effort to minimize the damage or claim it was all a misunderstanding that got blown out of proportion. Power doesn't apologize when it collapses. It doesn't explain itself or ask for forgiveness or try to make things right with the people it hurt. It just disappears quietly, hoping everyone will forget quickly and move on to the next scandal. Sometimes I wondered what Mark was doing now. If he'd found another position somewhere else, or if his reputation was damaged enough that he'd had to leave the industry entirely. If he ever thought about the day he fired me for taking a sick day, and whether he understood that decision had been the beginning of his own unraveling. But mostly, I didn't think about him at all anymore. The anger had faded. The hurt had healed. And I'd learned that the best revenge isn't about making someone suffer. It's about living well enough that their opinion of you stops mattering completely. Looking back now, I finally understood what had really happened that day in the conference room. I wasn't fired for taking a sick day without approval. That was never the real reason. I was fired because I wouldn't look away when Mark asked me to ignore financial irregularities. Because I flagged problems instead of burying them. Because I represented a threat to someone who needed silence and compliance more than he needed honesty and accuracy. He thought firing me would solve his problem. He thought making me disappear would make the evidence disappear too. He thought he could intimidate me into staying quiet with legal letters and misconduct designations and denied unemployment. But he was wrong. And if there's one thing I learned from all of this, it's something I'll carry with me forever. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You don't need to make threats or dramatic gestures or public scenes. You just need to be right. And you need to be patient enough for the truth to catch up with the people who tried to outrun it. Eventually, it always does.